My name is Juan Carlos Ramirez. I am 32 years old, and for a part of my life, I was convinced that trust is not only the foundation of all meaningful relationships, but also the moral compass that guides us through chaos. I grew up believing that if a person is honest, acts with integrity and loyalty, life will eventually reward this quiet devotion to the truth. Until recently, my life seemed like it was taken from a carefully crafted postcard. I was a senior project manager at a well-known software development company in the very heart of Madrid. I had a team. I worked with cutting-edge technologies and earned a six-figure salary that allowed me to lead a comfortable existence. I lived in a large, elegant apartment in the Salamanca district. Wooden floors, windows with a view of a tree-lined street, an open kitchen where I loved cooking Sunday dinners. At first glance, I had everything, but what I valued most was not the money or the professional prestige, but the sense of emotional stability I had built with such care. I was engaged to Laura Diaz, a woman I considered the person I knew to the depths of her soul. We had been together for 2 years and had even chosen the wedding date, the venue, and the song for our first dance. I was sure she was the one. In my heart, there was no doubt, no shadow, no suspicion. And then there was my father, Don Alberto Ramirez, a name that commanded respect, results, and a reputation built over 3 decades in Madrid's real estate world. But to me, he wasn't just a man or an outstanding professional figure. He was my quiet hero, the man who taught me to tie my shoelaces, to look people in the eye when shaking hands, and not to promise what I couldn't deliver. He was my protective shadow in childhood, my guide in adolescence, and my companion for endless conversations in adult life. He and my mother, Carmen, had been together for 35 years. And I'm not just talking about chronological time, but about shared dinners, Sundays, outdoors, about mutual understanding in a glance. Their relationship, at least from my point of view, was a masterpiece of love and patience. They held hands during walks, sent each other affectionate messages during the day, and still laughed together watching silly movies on Saturdays. For me, their love was proof that true commitment is still possible in a world filled with haste, distractions, and empty promises. When I introduced Laura, my father warmly welcomed her, literally opening his arms. I remember our first meeting at the El Paragua restaurant. He smiled sincerely at her, asked about her family, work, personal preferences. He wasn't a father who tested my partners. On the contrary, he always said that trust is a choice, not a reward. Laura was 30 years old. She worked as a marketing coordinator at a boutique agency in Chambéry, intelligent with a sharp sense of humor that captivated me, and a curiosity about the world that made me feel alive. We shared simple but deep passions. Walks in the Guadarrama Mountains, endless coffees on small terraces, and eternal arguments about which Neapolitan pizza in Madrid was the best. I defended the pizza at a café in Lavapiés. She swore by the superiority of a place in Malasaña. We met on July 4th, 2022, at a barbecue hosted by American friends. It was a hot day with the smell of grilled meat and cold beer. She was dressed in white and smiled as if her light contained the whole summer. We talked for hours, and at the end of the evening, saying goodbye, I knew, though I didn't understand how I knew, that this wasn't the last time. Within 3 months, I was sure I wanted to grow old next to her. My mother, Carmen, adored her. She said Laura had a kind heart and a laugh that filled the house. Dad, for his part, never tired of repeating how lucky I was. You don't meet women like that twice in a lifetime. On Sundays, we all had lunch together. Paella, wine, stories. Laura blended with my family as if she'd always been a part of it. We celebrated Christmas, birthdays, even Champions League nights at home. The wedding was to take place in October at the San Antonio de los Alemanes church. We also booked the Madrid History Museum for the reception. Everything was planned with Swiss precision. 150 guests, a cocktail bar with aged bourbon, a jazz trio playing Sinatra standards. We even had light choreography for the first dance, something elegant and refined. I chose Miguel, my university friend, almost a brother, as my best man, and Laura's sister, Sylvia, was appointed her maid of honor. The rehearsal dinner was already prepared at the Casa Lucio restaurant, and we booked a suite in a hotel in Tenerife for the honeymoon. Everything was falling into place. It was a mosaic of a perfect life. But the most beautiful mosaics often hide broken pieces beneath the surface. On the eve of the wedding, the Madrid air smelled of an autumn mood between nostalgia and promise. I was staying with my father at the Palace Hotel, a tradition he himself had suggested a couple of months earlier to symbolically spend the last hours of my bachelor life among men. We booked 2 adjacent suites, spacious with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and a refined coziness, as if created for memories. While Laura was staying with her mother and bridesmaids in another hotel, observing the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony, my father and I enjoyed a final custom-ordered dinner in the room. It was one of those calm nights when everything seemed to be in its place. We sat at a small table by the window, surrounded by the muffled noise of the city, watching the lights of Madrid twinkle like stars at ground level. On the table, a dish with beef tenderloin, a bottle of Rioja he had specially brought, and a stack of papers with the seating plan. We laughed, deciding who would sit with whom, trying to avoid family conflicts and unite the most talkative ones. With his passion for details, he drew lines, crossed out names, suggested options with a smile. "Don't you dare seat your Aunt Marta next to Cousin Julian," he said, laughing, "if you don't want a political argument right between the appetizers and the main course." I laughed too, not because of the joke, but because at that moment I felt happy, proud to be able to share this moment with my father. I thought this memory would stay with me forever, that one day I would tell my son that his grandfather was by my side the night before my wedding, tenderly finalizing the details as if it were our own ritual. But there are nights that don't end as you expect. There are unspoken words that hang in the air like an omen, and there are betrayals born in laughter, like a shadow in the midst of light. Around 1 a.m, my father stood up, saying he was going to the bathroom. He left his iPhone on the table next to an unfinished cup of coffee. I didn't mean to look at it, I swear, but a slight, barely perceptible vibration caught my attention. The screen lit up for a moment, showing a message notification. I don't know if it was tiredness, the wine, or just chance, but my eyes involuntarily slid to the screen. In large letters on a dark background, I read something that made no sense, and at the same time explained everything. "Thank you for an unforgettable night, Alberto. Your lips touching every part of my body won't leave my head. Can't wait for a repeat. You're incredible. Kisses. Our story will remain our secret. Sender, Laura." Time literally stopped. My senses shut down, as if someone had pulled the plugs on my perception. The same person who, just a few hours ago, had said he was proud of me, admired me as a man and a professional. And here was the proof, cruel, undeniable. This was not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, not a night of drunken lack of control. This was a carefully planned betrayal. The photo metadata and why I looked at it showed the picture was taken the previous night, while I was out with friends at my bachelor party. My hands were shaking, but my mind remained surprisingly clear, as if my brain, trained by years of meticulous work, knew. In a system error, you first preserve the evidence, secure the data, assess the damage. I took the phone, took screenshot after screenshot, and sent them to an encrypted server I used for work projects requiring confidentiality. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't break anything. I sat silently, looking at the table where just minutes ago we had been mapping out our happiness. When I heard the sound of the flushing toilet and my father's footsteps returning, I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but my mind remained remarkably clear, as if my brain, trained by years of painstaking work, knew. In a system failure, you first secure evidence, protect data, assess the damage. I took the phone, took screenshot after screenshot, and sent them to the encrypted server I used for work projects requiring confidentiality. I didn't cry, scream, or break anything. I sat silently, staring at the table where just minutes ago we had been charting our happiness. When I heard the sound of the flush and my father's footsteps returning, I took a deep breath. He came back with a calm face, unaware of the storm that was unfolding, sat down, took a sip of coffee, and said, "All set. Tomorrow is a big day, son." "Yes," I replied. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." He patted me on the shoulder, smiled, wished me good night, and quietly went to his room, closing the door behind him. And I remained sitting there, feeling the familiar world dissolve. When the door closed behind him, a thick silence fell over the room. It wasn't the cozy silence of a peaceful night, but a thick one, like a fog enveloping the soul and stealing your breath. The silence you feel when reality no longer resembles anything you knew before. I sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were still shaking, trying to calm my heartbeat. I breathed deeply and slowly, as if with each breath I could hold back the wave of thoughts raging in my head. Part of me wanted to run away, another to vomit. A third simply refused to accept the truth that had just been revealed, because this wasn't just a betrayal. It was the complete demolition of my foundations. A double betrayal, the most absurd, incredible, and cruel. My memory replayed all the recent moments one by one. Dinners at home with my parents and Laura, their private jokes, that new perfume she had suddenly started wearing, the praise my father had lavished on her that night. That comment seemed like an innocent remark. Praise with good taste. And now it revealed a crack in the facade that I had failed to notice. Work absences, calls that were cut short when I approached, my father's unexpected trips to Zaragoza, just when Laura said she was swamped with work from new clients. All the pieces were falling into place, but not as I had thought. They assembled their own puzzle, a parallel one, in which I was the only one who didn't know, the last to find out the truth. I am a man who made a living by detecting system errors, vulnerabilities in projects, minor deviations in workflow. Yet I was unable to notice the most obvious error in my own life. But something in me, a cold, analytical part, switched on. An inner voice, tempered by thousands of hours of professional crises, said clearly, "This isn't solved by shouting. It's solved by strategy." I stood up, walked barefoot across the room's carpet, as if seeking air through movement, poured myself a glass of water, looked out the window at Madrid's nighttime skyline, and thought, if they planned this in secret, I will quietly plan my response. The first decision was simple. Say nothing. Not that night, not immediately. I was going to let everything proceed as if nothing had happened, look them in the eye during the ceremony and pretend smile. I was even going to let them think they were getting away with it, that their lie would remain alive, and when the right moment came, the truth would hit them like an unstoppable wave. I turned on the laptop, transferred all the captured material to a private server, secured it with double encryption, uploaded the photos, messages, metadata. Then I created a simple web page with a white background and black text, without visual noise or sensationalism. Just facts, evidence, everything necessary, an equally harsh and clean archive. I made a QR code that immediately redirected to this site. I presented it as part of the wedding favors, modern, elegant, a surprise for the guests. I chose the wording carefully. Scan for a special surprise from the newlyweds. Something that would spark curiosity but not suspicion. Something everyone would want to look at, especially during the long ceremony when mobile phones would be on silent but active. It was already early morning, but I didn't feel sleepy, only a bright, furious clarity. I went to the hotel's business center, printed 200 small cards with a subdued, professional design, nothing flashy, the kind any modern couple would include in their wedding souvenirs. Returning to the room, I sat down again at the computer and, as if out of habit, opened the folder with childhood photos. I saw pictures with my father in the park, at the stadium, at my graduation. In each one, he was smiling with the sincere pride of a father guiding his son. I believed in him, loved him, wanted to be like him. And now all that was something else. It wasn't erased, it didn't disappear, but it transformed, as if someone had changed the context of every frame. As if all those moments had now become false memories, distorted by the quiet betrayal that had invisibly seeped through them. At 2 a.m., I took the phone and called Rebecca Soto, my trusted lawyer. I didn't hesitate. I needed someone sane, external, legally qualified to hear what was about to happen. She answered on the third ring with a husky but confident voice. "Juan, what's going on? Are you okay?" And then I told her everything. "Juan," Rebecca's voice trembled for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I have proof. I saw it with my own eyes. There couldn't be a mistake." Silence hung on the other end of the line. I know her well. It wasn't doubt, but restraint. A legal mind processing facts, anticipating scenarios, carefully considering my steps even in the most absurd hour of my life. "I'm so sorry," she finally said in a warm, human voice, quite different from the one used in calls about contract terms and signatures. "But I'm glad you're thinking clearly. That will save you." I told her everything, the QR code, the website, the printed cards, every step, every idea. She listened without interrupting, not with curiosity, not with empty surprise, but with that precision of attention that only professionals who have seen the harshest side of human nature can offer. "Tomorrow you will sign nothing," she said firmly, "first and foremost. Not the marriage contract, not a symbolic act, not any registration. No matter how religious the ceremony is, not a single document will be signed." "Of course," I replied. "I have no intention of entering into any legal agreements with that woman, not a single line." "And as for the rest," she continued, "what you're planning isn't just legal, it's brilliant. It's your content, your event, your truth. No one can forbid you from sharing it." We talked for over an hour. She advised me to document everything with timestamps, to protect the data as valuable intellectual property, because that's exactly what it was. She calmly and confidently reminded me that everything I did that day would be recorded not only in the memory of those present, but in the history of my own life. She spoke of dignity, justice, impact, and then did something I didn't expect. "I'll be there, Juan," she said quietly, "among the guests. If anything goes wrong, I'm ready to intervene." Sometimes the truth needs legal support, or just a friendly face in the crowd. I hung up feeling less alone, stronger, not because the situation was less painful, but because someone was validating my feelings, convincing me that my reaction wasn't exaggerated, that the tactical strategy I was building wasn't madness, but a worthy response to betrayal. It was past 3 a.m. The hotel was in complete silence. I went to the window again. The city seemed asleep, indifferent to the war raging inside me. The lights of Gran Via shone in the distance like beacons in a sea of uncertainty. And in that moment I clearly understood that what I was about to do was not revenge, not exactly. It was justice, a plea to clear my name, not to let myself be buried alive under a lie built by the two pillars of my world. At 5 a.m. I gave in to fatigue, slept little. The sleep was heavy, filled with vague images. Laura's face, my father's laughter, the church full of blurred faces. I woke up with the first rays of light seeping through the curtains. The day had come. I took a long shower. The hot water helped me hold on, washing away not just the grime of the previous night. I shaved carefully, put on the tuxedo that had just been tailored for me in the Salamanca district, with which I had spoken with a smile and wishes of good luck. I looked in the mirror carefully, and for the first time in hours saw something I didn't expect: serenity. It wasn't feigned calm, but resolve. That peace which comes not when everything is all right, but when you accept that you will do what must be done, regardless of the outcome. By 11, I was already at the church. San Antonio de los Alemanes looked like it did on postcards. Golden columns, Baroque frescoes, perfectly arranged white flowers. Everything seemed taken from a fairy tale, but I knew the truth. This altar would not become the stage for a union, but for a revelation. The guests began to arrive. Perfect suits, evening gowns, smiles of contained excitement. My mother, Carmen, appeared in a radiant dark blue dress, greeting everyone with the elegant modesty she was known for. She had no idea what she was about to face. No one knew, and that was painful, but necessary. I saw my father talking to the first guests. He was smiling, shaking hands, joking about traffic. Nothing in his face betrayed the guilt he carried. Or maybe I could no longer read it the same way. The mask was so well fitted it seemed real. Laura arrived a few minutes later. She looked magnificent. A classic white dress, her hair in an elegant bun, natural makeup. She walked confidently, greeting people, laughing, hugging old friends. In my eyes, her every movement had a false, artificial reflection, but no one else noticed. Only me, and perhaps only Rebecca, who had discreetly positioned herself among the guests as we had agreed. She approached, kissed me on the cheek, and whispered, "I can't wait to become your wife." That's when I knew the moment was near. Everything was ready. Inside the church, an atmosphere of expectation prevailed. The guests filled every pew with a mixture of delight and solemnity. The whisper of conversations blended with the gentle music of a string quartet playing in a corner, surrounding the space with an almost unreal atmosphere. For everyone, this was the most important day in their lives. For me, it was the beginning of the restoration of truth. From my place at the altar, I could clearly see every movement, every smile. The best man, Miguel, patted me on the back, convinced I was nervous for the usual reasons: the engagement, the emotions, the scale of the event. Laura's sister Sylvia kept wiping tears of joy with an embroidered handkerchief. My mother, sitting in the front row, radiated that quiet harmony that mothers have when they feel everything is in order. But everything was about to collapse. The wedding planner, Julieta, moved through the church with the precision of a professional choreographer. We had already spoken. I told her these QR code cards were a small digital gift for the guests, a modern trend, a kind of virtual time capsule, I said calmly, almost with a smile. She smiled, pleased that it matched the level of an event with such carefully crafted details. She began handing out the cards to the guests neatly, as if they were special souvenirs, printed with love. No one found it suspicious. We live in a world where everything is scanned, shared, digitized. No one suspected they were about to scan the exposure of a collective lie. I watched, measuring the time, counting the seconds. The ceremony began. Father Manuel, a man with a calm voice and a compassionate gaze, began with the classic words about love, respect, the sacred union of marriage. His voice echoed through the golden walls, but my ears were listening to a different symphony. The quiet whispers of those who were already starting to scan. The first was Uncle Mario, a naturally inquisitive man, always the first to try a new app, scanning digital menus. I saw him point his camera at the code, and then his face changed, from a smile to confusion, from confusion to horror. He turned to his wife, showed her the screen, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Then my cousin Andrea, then David, my boss, who turned pale as if he had seen a corpse. The code spread like a quiet virus among the pews. No one was speaking aloud yet, but the anxiety grew like an unstoppable wave. Glances changed, the atmosphere too. The whispers were different now. Guests were passing mobile phones from hand to hand, their eyes wide open, as if what they were seeing was unreal. The most amazing thing was that all this was happening in parallel with the ceremony, which continued on its course as if nothing had happened. Laura was next to me, calm, serene, suspecting nothing. She was looking attentively at Father Manuel with that sweet gaze she had honed over the years. In her head, everything was perfect. In mine, the time was approaching the precise moment. Then something stronger than any word happened. Mercedes, Laura's aunt, showed the mobile phone to the mother of the bride. She looked, and her expression changed in seconds. First she frowned, then she squinted, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Finally let out a barely audible guttural cry, and covered her face with both hands. My mother also quickly received her card. I saw her so beautiful, so excited. Her smile, that soft gesture of maternal satisfaction, vanished instantly as soon as she scanned the code. I watched as her eyes read, as her facial expression changed to pain, deep, tearing, as if the world was crumbling at her feet. That moment was the most painful of all, but nevertheless I did not tremble. I knew I couldn't hesitate. No, not now. My father, sitting a few meters away, began to get nervous. He looked around bewildered, seeing his friends, colleagues, relatives looking at him differently. Smiles disappeared, conversations turned into hurried whispers. Glances that once expressed admiration turned to disgust, surprise, condemnation. He leaned towards my mother and said something in her ear, but she pulled away sharply, looked at him as if she didn't recognize him. Her eyes were full of tears and anger. Then Father Manuel reached the pivotal moment. His voice rose. As is the tradition, if anyone can show just cause why Juan Carlos and Laura should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Silence. Absolute silence. But it was an unusual wedding silence. It was something else. The contained tension of 150 people who knew what the newlyweds were still pretending not to know. And then I stepped forward, reached out, calmly took the microphone in my hands. "Yes," I said in a firm, confident voice, without trembling or anger. "I have something to say." The whole church held its breath. I held the microphone between my fingers like a sacred object. The echo of my voice still hung between the Baroque columns as I slowly turned to Laura. Her eyes searched me in confusion. A wrinkle appeared between her eyebrows. Her smile trembled, and then she understood. It wasn't immediate, but it was visible. Initial surprise, incomprehension, confusion, and finally, horror. Pure horror, born when a house of cards begins to collapse and you don't know where to put your hands to prevent the crash. My father, sitting in the front row, stood up half a second late. His face instantly switched from pride to panic, so quickly it seemed grotesque. He froze, as if hoping that what was coming wasn't real. But it was the truth, and it was unavoidable. "I loved you, Laura," I said, without raising my voice. But every word fell heavily like a hammer. "With all my heart, I believed in you more than I believe in God." I saw tears gathering in her eyes. She wanted to speak, but couldn't. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, only ragged breathing, as if the air refused to enter her lungs. I turned to my father. His name didn't need to be spoken. His face said it all. "And you?" "Dad," I continued, "you were my role model, my mentor, the person who taught me to speak the truth even if it hurts, to keep my word even when it's difficult, to be faithful even when the world wasn't." Upon uttering the word "Dad," my voice barely trembled, not from weakness, but from a wound that tore open like a knife stab in the middle of my chest. I didn't care that everyone was watching. At that moment, I was one-on-one with the two pillars of my life, collapsing simultaneously. The silence was total. Father Manuel was pale, his hands folded on his chest as if praying silently. The guests looked in different directions. Some didn't know where to look, to avert their gaze or to hold it. Many already knew. They had scanned the code, seen the pictures, but hearing me made it all different, irreversible. "Last night," I said, now quietly, almost in a surgical tone, "I learned that the two people I trusted most were lying to me. They didn't just share secrets. They shared a bed, bodies, words I thought were exclusive. They planned to let me walk to this altar with a blindfold over my eyes and a noose around my neck." Some guests exclaimed in disbelief. Others put their hands over their mouths. I saw Sylvia, Laura's sister, cover her face with her hands and sob. I saw David, my boss, shaking his head, muttering something to his wife. Cousin Andrea was openly crying, but I decided I wouldn't make a personal scandal. I continued, "No, this betrayal was meticulous, constant, quiet, and public in its contempt. Therefore, the truth must also be public. It must be born here before everyone, like a flower blooming among ruins." I stretched out my hand, pointing at those present. "You have already seen the evidence, the messages, the photographs, the times and places. There is no doubt, no room for confusion. There are only facts." Laura burst into tears, covering her face with her veil. Her body shook. She took a step towards me, as if wanting to explain herself, but I didn't let her. "No," I said, lowering the microphone. "No more empty words." My father tried to approach, took a step between the pews, but my mother Carmen stood up first, stood in front of him, looked at him with such a mixture of anger and despair that is rare to see on a human face. She said nothing, just looked, and he froze like a thief caught red-handed. "This wedding is over," I finally said, looking at the priest. "This ceremony is a funeral, but not mine." I turned to the central aisle, walked down it slowly with my head held high and a steady gait, as if every step was a declaration of independence. Behind me, the church turned into an emotional crater, restrained cries, accelerated whispers. Laura was collapsing, and my father was trying to talk to someone, anyone who would still listen to him, but no one would. The truth was aflame, consuming everything. I stepped out into the fresh air. The sky was clear. The October-autumn air was clean and cold, as if the universe wanted to give me a moment of clarity. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no fear or sadness. I felt something else. Freedom. Outside, the sounds of the city harshly contrasted with the silence I had left behind. The sounds of car horns, distant bells, the voice of a street vendor. Everything continued, as if the world didn't know that my world had just exploded. I slowly stepped onto the church steps, feeling every step under the soles of my shoes, as if they were the last traces of the weight I had been carrying for months without knowing it. I stopped on the very last step before the street and looked ahead. No one was following me yet. I was accompanied only by the wind, fresh, almost pitying. But I wasn't alone for long. Miguel, my best friend, came out after me, still in shock. I saw him approaching with quick, nervous steps, as if he didn't know whether to hug me or leave me alone. "Juan," he exclaimed, "I can't believe what I just saw. No, I still can't comprehend it. Are you okay?" I looked at him. This man had shared university drunkenness, sports defeats, conversations until 3 a.m. about the meaning of life with me. With him, I didn't need to pretend. With him, I could be honest. "Better than I have been in a long time," I replied. "The truth is painful, yes, but it purifies." Miguel hugged me silently, a simple, sincere gesture of solidarity that required no words. That hug was an anchor in the chaos. Behind us, the church doors remained open. Some guests were starting to come out. Some were crying, some were whispering among themselves, trying to understand what they had just seen. Some were still holding their mobile phones, as if they couldn't let go, as if looking at those images again was the only way to cope with the horror. I saw Sylvia, Laura's sister, sitting on the steps, her head in her hands, broken. No one was comforting her. No one knew how. And then my mother came out. The woman who gave me life walked slowly but with unshakable dignity. Her face was wet with tears, but her posture was firm. She approached me, said not a word, but firmly took my hand with a strength that said, "I am with you. This does not define you. You will get through this." I looked at her. She nodded silently, and I felt something broken inside me begin to rebuild itself. Chaos fully erupted just a few minutes later. Some guests confronted Laura. Others surrounded my father with accusations, questions, looks of contempt. A journalist from Prensa Rosa, who had slipped in among the guests, was already writing an exclusive piece. I knew it would go beyond the church walls and explode like dynamite on social media, but I didn't care anymore. Not anymore. And so it happened. By the evening of that same Saturday, the first videos and photos from the scene were spreading on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. A couple of guests shared screenshots from the website with the evidence. Some were outraged, others simply fascinated by the scandal. By Sunday morning, it was a trend all over Spain in WhatsApp groups, podcasts, relationship blogs. A Twitter thread with a chronology of events gathered over 500,000 views in 12 hours. On Monday, the calls started. Local media wanted details. TV programs offered money for an exclusive interview. Some journalists approached me with prepared questions in a polite manner. How do you feel? What message do you want to send to the world after such a revelation? One of them even dared to say, "You are a modern symbol of emotional male empowerment." I refused almost all offers. I wasn't interested in becoming a viral character, but I agreed to talk to a journalist from El País, an old acquaintance who had written about my company's technologies and, more importantly, knew how to listen. I gave a brief interview without embellishment or melodrama. "I have no thirst for fame," I said. "I simply believe in the truth, and believe that people have the right to know who they are dealing with, especially when it comes to trust and honesty." My words were published without sensationalism, and that was enough for other media to quote them with respect. But not everyone emerged unscathed. Laura was fired in less than a week. Her company, which on its website proclaimed the protection of family values and ethical responsibility, could not afford to be associated with a scandal of such magnitude. Her reputation was tarnished. Clients were leaving. The damage was irreversible. My father faced something even worse. The destruction of a reputation built over 30 years. Rumors, photographs, articles. All this led to several major clients terminating their contracts. His longtime partner, who had accompanied him in many multi-million-dollar deals, immediately ended their collaboration. Within a few weeks, he went from being an authority to a name no one wanted to utter. My mother did not act as many expected. She filed for divorce just 2 weeks after the incident, without shouting, without revenge, with a quiet determination that reminded me of myself. "It's not just your actions," she said one evening as we drank tea in the living room, surrounded by family photos that no longer meant the same thing. "It's that he let you walk to that church, knowing everything he knew, that I can never forgive him." The following days were a strange mix of calm and storm. Calm inside, because the hardest step had been taken, and storm outside, because the world wouldn't stop talking about what had happened. Sometimes neighbors greeted me with respect and curiosity. At other times, acquaintances sent vague messages, as if it hurt to analyze it chapter by chapter. But I didn't respond. I kept going step by step, as if my life had now become a minefield to be crossed carefully, but without stopping. All legal matters were handled by Rebecca Soto, my lawyer. She did it with the precision and delicacy of an emotional surgeon. She not only protected my assets and rights every attempt, even backdoor claims from Lee, the marriage had never been, divorce was needed. List of matters to settle, bookings, bills, emotional logistics created but financed by one. Over 80% of the expense rental to the flowers in a reef. Oro back, Rebecca's. Some supply, others offered partial. The main thing was that Laura's chance to demand anything to the prenuptial without hesitation or come into effect were securely protected. The best protection document, but the truth with which I had chosen. During that period, I did a message from Laura, desperate and called dozens of times, tried to contact other. Everyone out of revenge, but to say, dared to look for me. At first, they were messages, emoji. "I need to talk to you, please." I had no words because what he had done, explanations. It only, until one Saturday day in the church, I recognized Paul. Hesitant not for his sake, but for he needed to close this chat in cracks. He was there, in casual clothes, impeccable suit of the he once was. Empty, as if on his shoulders, whispered, but I need to tell you, so sorry." Years I had idealized such a high pedestal, stating, but now broken idol. There was repentant and felt something supreme. I forgive him in the eye, not because I don't want to carry. It takes up space. His eyes didn't try for a second chance. I closed the door as if sealing a coffin, and not mine, past that had to die, and I did. Accepted a job offer for a tech Mexico, offered director of AI colleague had recommended me. The conditions not what attracted me. I needed to leave shame or to flee where, to walk my story. So I with a clean slate with my ability, instinct for recovery. I sold something charity. It was grief and nostalgia in Salamanca, but it was full of goodbye to my mother with a hug. She asked me to not to close my heart, let pain define me. One is like them, son. There are still good, and you deserve to meet that blessing. Monterey greet on, a different ribbons cutting the horizon like land. I knew instead of being embarrassed, exactly what I needed. Opportunity. The work was challenging. AI projects were an important industry. Myself and work like slaughter to quell an inner and escape, but a necessary space again without the voice ring in my ear. Kind, efficient. They knew what they needed. I was from Spain with experience. With obsessive work, one asked about personal, nothing extra. Shyness, I was just still whole. I developed a steady modern apartment in the sand with huge windows offering a view of the Sierra Madre. I got up early, ran several kilometers before starting the workday. In the evenings, I read books on philosophy, science, Japanese prose, and every Sunday without fail, I sat down at the computer and wrote. I didn't know what I needed to write until I started. At first, it was scattered notes, fragments, unanswered questions. Then they turned into letters I would never send, letters to my father, to Laura, to myself. Then, without noticing, I started keeping a kind of recovery diary. Each entry spoke not of pain, but of what comes next, what to do with the rubble, how to rebuild the soul when there's no way back. Sometimes I walked alone in Fundadora Park, listening to instrumental music, stopping in corners where I saw children playing or laughing couples, and felt a pang, but also a quiet hope, as if one could learn to trust again one day. I started going out little by little, joined a book club in an independent bookstore. We discussed Latin American authors, Borges, Mariana Enriquez, Cortázar. There I met interesting people, simple, unpretentious, who didn't look at me as a viral story, but as a person going through their own path. One of them was Lucia. She was 36. She worked in industrial design and spoke with such an unhurried manner, as if thinking before opening her mouth. First we exchanged books, then went for coffee, then for walks. Nothing more. Nothing like love, but genuine friendship, conversation that isn't burdensome, silence that doesn't hinder. And that at that moment was all I needed. My mother wrote to me every week, telling me about her divorce process, how she was renovating part of the apartment, how she had started playing the piano again, after 20 years. In one of the letters, she said something that stayed with me forever. Sometimes the deepest love is not about saving another, but about saving yourself when everything falls apart. Laura disappeared from my sight forever. I learned from a mutual friend that she had moved back in with her parents in Pamplona, tried to find a job at another agency without success, avoided social events, and was no longer in photos on her social media. I didn't rejoice in her downfall, but I didn't mourn it either. She chose her path and knew the price. According to my mother, my father now works as a junior agent in a small real estate company on the outskirts of Madrid, with no prestige, no name. He tried to rise, but his name now meant betrayal in many circles. The relationship with Laura didn't last a month after the scandal, perhaps because they were bound not by love, but by the shadow of the forbidden, which became unbearable when brought to light. Deep down, I knew they were reaping the fruits of their actions, but I no longer stopped to look at their harvest. I had too much ahead of me. The story of my interrupted wedding became an urban legend in some circles in Madrid. It was told at meetings, dinners, conversations. Some used it as a warning, others as inspiration. It hardly bothered me anymore. What had been an open wound had turned into a scar. Visible, yes, but without pain. Now I was living, not surviving, but living. 6 months had passed since that day in the church. And although time doesn't erase the past, it has a remarkable ability to reinterpret what you feel when remembering. I no longer dreamed of the betrayal, didn't wake up in fright, didn't replay every conversation looking for clues. What was first an obsession to understand why, how, from what moment, began to dissolve like fog at dawn. And not because I had forgotten, but because I had learned. I understood that pain doesn't obey a calendar, that it isn't overcome in strict stages, that sometimes you fall back just when you thought you had stepped forward. But I also understood that not everything is broken forever, that there are parts of you that awaken only after a fall. In Monterey, I found a version of myself I didn't know, freer, more aware, lighter. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, not to my father, not to Laura, not even to myself. I no longer measured myself by successes, by feelings, by the approval of others. I measured myself by the ability to get up, to look at the world without cynicism, to move forward without hiding the scar. I started dating again. Yes, there were pleasant ones. There were just ordinary ones. I wasn't looking to fill a void. I just wanted to walk the path together with someone. I realized that trust is not a gift given to another without a second glance. It's a plant that is watered gradually with small, consistent, and honest actions. Lucia and I were still friends, nothing more. But every conversation with her was a lesson in humanity. She taught me to listen without interrupting, to observe without judging. In her own way, she became my first refuge in a foreign land. And sometimes the most important refuges aren't about passion, but about peace. My mother came to visit me a few months later. We walked around the city center in Rufino Tamayo Park and dined in a restaurant where she tried cabrito al pastor for the first time. We laughed like we hadn't in a long time. And once, without waiting for a request, she took my hand across the table and said, "Juan, I'm proud of you, not for what you did that day, but for what you did afterwards." And I understood what she meant. True courage wasn't in standing before everyone and speaking the truth, but in not remaining in that moment, not living in anger forever, not using resentment as a shield. It was important to let go. At the end of the year, I closed my recovery diary. The last entry read, "I was betrayed. Yes, I was humiliated, but I awakened, because when everything you took for granted is taken from you, you learn what truly belongs to you. Dignity, the ability to be reborn, your own voice." The story of the interrupted wedding, the double betrayal, and the public explosion remained in the past, like an echo that no longer haunts me. Now another story was beginning, a story without performances and QR codes, without hidden scripts, but with the promise to live by the truth, even if it hurts, to love without haste, even if it's not easy, and to move forward with open eyes, even if the path is sometimes unclear. Because what I learned, if anything, is that the most destructive falls can be the beginning of the best changes, and the darkest days are not the end, but a pause before rebirth. And when you go through hell with a lit soul, what remains is not fire, but light. If this story touched your soul, if you ever felt the world crumbling but kept going anyway, like this video, share your experience in the comments, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more such stories. Here, we honor every day the strength born from pain and the courage to start over. Thank you for getting to this point. See you in the next story.